Starting recording. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. This video is about civilization, feudalism, the Battle of Hastings, and the Magna Carta. But very brief introduction. We'll be going about 5 times regular speed. I want to get this video out and done. Version 2.0, ready for people who were sick and missed class. So here it goes. There's all kinds of fun stuff here for us today to look at. Part 1, in an introduction. Part 2, the features of civilization. An incredibly interesting and important topic. What are the features of feudalism? What's the significance of the Battle of Hastings? And Part 5, why is the Magna Carta important? An incredibly interesting section. And of course, fascinating but scary, medieval law and power and justice. And some really interesting stuff in extra enrichment. If you stick around to part 7, we'll take a look at exciting things about Vikings and more and more. Okay, here we go. Part 1, introduction. So we got some really interesting big questions to take a look at. Let's take a look at our big questions. Contact and conflict between peoples stimulated significant culture, social, and political change. Again, this is important. Contact and conflict between peoples stimulated significant culture, social, and political change. Number 2, human and environmental factors shape changes in population and living standards. Okay, for the speed, we got to move on to a statement of inquiry. Characteristics and systems of civilizations, aka culture, government, religion, writing, social structure, etc., and more, as well as conflict and international interactions, affect and change individuals and societies in various times, places, and spaces. Moving on for the sake of time. Inquiry questions. What are the characteristics of a civilization? How did feudalism affect the standard of life of the average person in the Middle Ages? Why is the Magna Carta significant to law, government systems, democracy, constitutional limits, human rights, and beyond? And beyond the country of England, across time and place. Moving on for the sake of time in this extra fast version. Significance and connections. The characteristics of civilization are important for a few reasons. They help us understand why civilization might end. They help us understand how to categorize and compare and contrast two different civilizations. They help us understand what is not a civilization and compare the terms to like terms or similar terms. The terms like nations, ethnicities, countries, and the term hunter-gatherer. Finally, the term is also very important because of how it has been misused, used and misused in racist and disrespectful ways, including in colonialism, in the efforts to promote colonialism or to promote conquest. Significance and connections. Understanding feudalism well can help prepare one for the study of other political systems, the study of the Renaissance, be prepared for the study of the Age of Enlightenment, the French Revolution, and various communist revolutions, and more. Significance and connections. The Magna Carta has many connections to law, human rights, and democratic government today. Though the magnitude of these connections might be debated by some sources. The Magna Carta could inspire Declaration of the Human Rights of Man and the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Part 2, characteristics of a civilization. Here we go with the preamble. Warning, warning. The term civilization is a loaded word along with words like primitive, barbarian, savage, and other terms. These words have been used and could be still used for propaganda or insults. This term is important to understand deeply for academic study, but it's also important to understand how history of this term and related concepts have been used in connection with racism, colonialism, and pejorative use. Please do not use these words disrespectfully to hurt people. Now, with the disclaimer out of the way, let's take a look at two different sources of civilization, or the characteristics of civilization. One from National Geographic and one from Pathways. Author Cranny, Michael Cranny. Something that's missing from these two lists would be a food surplus from large-scale agriculture and farming. That's not on either of these lists, but it's been on other lists. This one from the National Geographic does have large population centers, aka cities, on other lists. Let's see about writing. This one from Cranny has knowledge transfer instead of written language. And on this side, they have shared communication strategies instead of written language. So here are some examples where they have different wording, something similar. Other lists might have written language instead. So you can see there's some variation across different lists. So what are the differences? And if we were to make a longer list, what could we include? Okay, a long list would include fresh water. Again, this is omitted from many lists because fresh water is common to all civilizations. So it doesn't necessarily help with comparison, and also it's common to other societies that are not considered civilizations. So that's why this one might be omitted from many lists. Farming, agriculture, and excess food. It's on many lists, not on all lists. It's important to allow job specialization. There's an example, an exception. West Coast First Nations had salmon as a food source that allowed enough food specialization in the form of artists who created complex artwork in masks and totems and other types of fine art. This would be an example why specifically farming or agriculture might not be needed. Other exceptions would be societies that use a lot of herding or cattle or other ways of getting large excess food surpluses. Okay. Number 3, government organized system of power and leadership. Now, government is a common one on many lists. Breaking government down into different categories, less so. However, laws is medium common on many lists of characteristics of civilization. And military is probably the least common on lists of the characteristics of civilization. These might be embedded into government or implied into government. Protection from invasion, though, is important for civilization and countries, and therefore one could argue that military power is worth studying in terms of what causes civilizations to end, collapse, and what causes countries and empires to be no more. Okay, characteristics of a civilization. Number 6, cities or large population centers or equivalents. This is often more recognized in archaeology when built with permanent materials such as stone. However, stone buildings may not be a criterion, but it is common among famous ancient civilizations. However, this is debatable, and it could be argued that wood or the Mongolian yurts could be exceptions. Infrastructure and public works. Permanent infrastructure construction leaves more evidence for archaeology. Therefore, it's more famous when a civilization has left in the past, in history, stone structures. However, this is debatable. And this criteria is omitted from some lists altogether. Characteristics of a civilization. Arts, culture, and style of architecture. Note, this characteristic has different labels on different lists. Written communication. Characteristics of a civilization. Now again, this could be worded as knowledge transfer from generation to generation and across distances. And knowledge transfer would, as a criteria or as an explanation for this one, would allow for civilizations that use storytelling as their system of knowledge transfer. Eventually, education systems might also be considered a characteristic of civilization, more so in modern civilizations rather than ancient civilizations. Complex division of labor and job specialization. This means that people can specialize in becoming experts in an area because they do not need to worry about where their food is coming from, where their next meal is coming from. Job specialization can promote innovation, new technologies, and people who are artists or warriors or soldiers or other very specific jobs, and they can become experts. Okay, social structure and or social classes. This can help support job specialization. Social structure and social classes have been common in ancient civilizations to the point of having very powerful people and people with very little power who could be slaves or serfs. So this is a very debatable and controversial area, and it's debatable in terms of the extent it needs to exist in a civilization and the challenges between moving between the different levels of social stratification. This also gets challenges later on in modern era in the 20th century as different philosophers debate this. Complex commerce and systems of trade. Currency can be a system of exchange. Currency and trade help support job specialization. Some lists may omit this characteristic or simplify it, especially currency. Religion, organized religion, or systems of beliefs, or common narratives, ideologies, and or myths. Note, myths might be a loaded word. Some groups might not appreciate their core beliefs or dogmas being called myths. And technological innovation. Some lists omit this characteristic. Michael Craney includes this as a characteristic of civilization. Why important? They help us understand why civilization might end, and we took a look at this at the very beginning of this video. The Mongolians were an exception because they were nomadic. The Mongolians did not have cities made of stone or massive public works or large-scale farm-based agriculture. Instead, they had herds of animals. What are exceptions or debatable issues? A big debatable issue would be indigenous civilization often had elements that some perspectives will ignore. For example, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy had a complex system of government. FYI, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy is also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. What are exceptions or debatable issues? Again, indigenous civilizations often had elements that some perspectives will ignore. Another example is the West Coast First Nations had salmon as a food source that allowed enough food to have job specialization in the form of artists who created complex artwork in the form of mass totems and other artwork. Another exception or debatable issue, perhaps an exception could be considered the criteria to have a unified religion. For example, Canada and many other Western nations that are considered part of Western civilizations have freedom of religions and belief embedded into their national constitution. How could civilization be misused? The term civilization can be misused for disrespect or, one, to promote colonialism and oppress indigenous people. Not good. To promote slavery. Also not good. To promote invasion war. Not good. To incite racism. Not good. And to incite genocide. Not only is this very not good, this is a crime. Okay. The term civilization has been used and misused in opposites as pejoratives, insults in the forms of not civilized, uncivilized, or primitive. Okay, so this section is a little bit confusing for some. Some students asked me to explain this again. So in the context of, say, for example, colonialism, certain stories might exist where the colonial power will make a case that they have the right or ability to claim some land because nobody lives on that land, or the people living on that land are considered by the argument to be not civilized, uncivilized, or primitive. This is how the term civilization and its opposites could be used in that context. And therefore, this creates the concept of the loaded word, which we need to be careful about how we use the concept of civilization and its opposites as uncivilized or not civilized. Okay, so what is an example of a barbarian? Also another loaded word. Now, Europeans did consider the Vikings, Vandals, Huns, Goths were considered barbarians by other Europeans. There's certain groups that would not appreciate being called a barbarian, so we have to consider that this is a sensitive word, a loaded word, and should not be used as an insult. It's often used more for very historic, ancient people groups like the Vikings or the Huns, but it's not typically considered polite to use it for modern people groups in modern times. Also note, there is sometimes an element of war propaganda in historical records. So, for example, English writers writing about the Vikings might speak about the Vikings in a certain way in their writings. Why might societies of hunter-gatherers not be considered a civilization? So again, this is used in historical context going back thousands of years. Hunter-gatherers might not be considered a civilization in ancient times because of the lack of cities and the lack of agriculture and farming, as well as some of the other characteristics of civilization. Now, there are some modern people who like to go camping, let's say, and hunting or other types of activities, and they may not consider being called a hunter-gatherer or barbarian polite in modern times. So this would be used again for ancient civilizations, ancient societies. What are the features of feudalism? Part 3. We finally made it to part 3. Feudalism, land, loyalty, and faith, also known as fidelity for loyalty and a fief for land, or a fiefdom. And so these are ways of turning loyalty and land into words that start with F. Also, they're older words, fealty and fief. Another word that starts with F is, of course, feudalism and the feudal pyramid. Lords, knights, and serfs. Let's take a look at monarchy and feudalism. Lords would get land from the king in exchange for loyalty. Lords would give portions of land to knights for military service. Knights would lend small portions of land to serfs or farmers in exchange for food and work. Work service. The Pope and the Church had a larger role in the power and the daily life of people, including births, weddings, and funerals. Okay, here's a very fun diagram of the feudal pyramid. Now, I like this diagram because it shows the arrows of the sort of implied social contract. Sometimes implied, sometimes promises being made, promises of military service, and promises of land in exchange for the military service. Now, here is a multi-layered pyramid. 5 layers in the main pyramid and a bonus layer at the top showing a connection in terms that the church may sometimes exert influence over monarchs, who would then exert influence over nobles. But nobles would also try to exert influence over monarchs as well. An example of this would be King John of England, where the barons forced him to sign the Magna Carta. And then there's knights and vassals under the nobles, And then we've got merchants and farmers and craftsmen. Now this tier here, in this level, these people would be considered having their freedom. So they have more power than the peasants and serfs who are tied to the land. But the merchants, farmers, and craftsmen, and in this layer could be very educated people with their freedom who might get to become doctors or lawyers, but they're not considered to have the rank of nobility, which would be the barons, the dukes, and the earls at the level of nobles and lords and ladies. And well as dukes, you might have duchess, as well as barons, you might have baroness. Okay, moving on. Oh, I should explain quickly vassals. So vassals means you have promised to be loyal to your boss, who is somebody above you. And so knights would promise to be loyal to their lord. That means they're underneath a lord. So what does that mean? Vassals, in some cases, there would be a rare case where a monarch might promise to be a vassal to another monarch. And so a monarch themselves could actually become a vassal, or might have started off being a vassal. Okay, the monarchy. Often in medieval times, the monarchy would argue that their power existed because of a philosophy called divine right. Many monarchs wanted to have absolute monarchy, but sometimes their power was limited by the church and other powerful nobles. Feudalism was a system of organizing government and power, land, labor, and military service duties, and social hierarchy. Feudalism was characterized by the classes called serf, knights, nobility, or lords, and royalty. The clergy or church had an important role, and justice and laws were not often applied to classes equally, but there were systems. They didn't always seem fair by our standards. A code of chivalry from the Song of Roland. Some of these wouldn't make much sense in our modern time periods, but some might make sense to us. This one, number 3 here on this line, says to protect the weak and the defenseless. That might be one that makes some sense in our times. Also down here, at all times to speak the truth, to respect and the honor of women. Now the question is were these more poetic, or did people actually follow these, and were these created after the fact, or were these created in the time period that they were ascribed to? Okay, where would these chess pieces fit in the feudal pyramid? Okay, over here we have the knight from chess, which could represent the military knights who would give their loyalty and military service to a lord of the manor, or a lord of some land, who would give them maybe a small piece of land. Now, the lord could live in a manor or a small castle, and you have here the castle piece here representing the castle and the land underneath the castle, and the nobility who would live in either the castle or the manor on the land. And that's a powerful piece in chess. But the most important piece of chess is the king, and the most powerful piece in chess is the queen, the two pieces of royalty. And side by side of the royalty, you have a very powerful piece, not necessarily the most powerful piece, but a very powerful piece known as the bishop. And they are very close in chess in their starting position to the royal pieces. Okay, so if we were comparing this to the feudal pyramid, the monarchy would be at the top of the pyramid. And just underneath the monarchy, in the layer of nobility, you would have probably the castle piece representing the nobility. And underneath that, you would have the knights. And underneath, at the very bottom of the pyramid, you would have the pawn from chess, representing the serfs and the peasants. Okay, the Battle of Hastings. What was the significance? Battle of the Hastings. The Vikings had conquered areas of England and France before the Battle of Hastings. The invader, William the Conqueror, was from Normandy. He spoke French and he attacked with French war technology, but he was descended from Vikings who had already conquered an area of France called Normandy, which they got in a treaty deal. An interesting treaty deal because with the Normans, the Vikings, occupying the land of Normandy and promising loyalty to the French king, it created a buffer state to protect France from more Viking invasions. A Viking land. William the Conqueror himself was the vassal of the King of France, the French king, the King of France. So this is a situation where William the Conqueror becomes the King of England, but he's in the state of being a vassal to the King of France, which is one of those strange exceptions from history. We're going to skip this video in the fast version. There's a video about the Battle of Hastings. There's another video about the Battle of Hastings. Of course, we're skipping this in the fast version. Significance. Feudalism came to England. This is one of the big things. Now, there were, of course, pieces of medieval feudalism or pieces of the culture of the Middle Ages that had already come to England from the Anglo-Saxons. In particular, trial by ordeal had already come to England before the Norman invasion. But in particular, the structure of the organizing of the land, as documented by the Domesday Book, is where we get the idea that feudalism came to England from the evidence of the Domesday Book, which was a way of doing a census to improve accurate taxation. And of course, a big thing was more words from the French language came to England with the conquest of the Normans from Normandy. Battle of Hastings significance. It set the stage for years of conflict between the English and French because each side of the English Channel, there were claims to the French throne and there were claims to the English throne. And this rivalry between the English and French would last and would impact many wars, including the 7 Years' War, which would spill over into North America as the English and French would battle for the continent of North America, which would shape the history of the United States of America and Canada, and of course, Quebec. Also, this would shape the lives of the indigenous allies who would ally with themselves during these various wars, the 7 Years' Wars being one of them. At that time period, the French were really good at creating alliances with the indigenous population as a generalization. Later on, in the War of 1812 between the British and the United States of America, Tecumseh would ally himself with the British, as well as many of the Mohawk warriors. The Magna Carta. King John, the Magna Carta, and significance. Very significant for many reasons and many layers. Although, sometimes, some historians, some sources would say that the significance is overwrought or over-exaggerated. However, I would suggest to you that the significance is real and important because of the inspiration to other documents in the future and that domino effect from inspiration to inspiration. So the Magna Carta and its story, whether over-exaggerated or not, could inspire things like the U.S. Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the U.S., also the Declaration of the Rights of Man from the French Revolution, and eventually the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Okay, King John. Who was King John? Was he just a Disney character? Was he a character from fiction of Robin Hood? Or who was he? Well, he was the brother of King Richard, who wanted to go crusading. And while King Richard was crusading, he did try to seize the throne, but he did not succeed at that time, even though he wanted to. He was at one point in time excommunicated by the Pope and had to give in to the Pope. And he was sometimes considered the worst king of England, and sometimes called soft sword as an epithet. Okay, the Magna Carta significance. The barons got him to sit down and sign the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta is significant to law, government systems, democracy, constitutional limits, and human rights in England and beyond the country of England, to various places, time, and space and place. Okay, so places where you could argue that it had influence was United States during the American Revolution, in France during the French Revolution, and of course to the country of Canada and the Canadian Constitution. The Magna Carta is important for many reasons. Number one, first, the Magna Carta states that everyone is under the law, even the monarch. This has implications today in Canada because people can take the government to court if the government does not obey the law as stated in the Constitution of Canada. Now, there are a couple things to learn about in the future, like the notwithstanding clause in Canada, ways of making exceptions to the Constitution, but for now, we'll leave that part as that. Number two, the Magna Carta was a key step towards the government system referred to as the constitutional monarchy. This is important for us as Canadians because today Canada is a constitutional monarchy. It's also important for many other countries in the world, including England. Now, a lot of these things is the Magna Carta is a baby step, a first step, a planting of seeds yet to grow, the first tilt in a long line of dominoes yet to fall, but many historians consider it significant, although some sources consider it over-exaggerated. But the significance is there. The Magna Carta, number 3, starts the early seeds for the long process in the history of rights for individuals. Rights for individuals to continue to develop through history. Individuals are granted rights to justice. This was not always the case in feudal systems where justice was more accessible for people with wealth and power. Now, this is one of those cases where, at first, yes, the Magna Carta is more about justice for the lords, the barons, the people of power, than for people at the bottom. But it's the seeds of rights for everybody, but it's not quite all the way there yet. In particular, the monarch was required to treat his subjects according to the laws of the land. In addition, people had the right to a fair trial. People also had the right not to be arrested and deprived of liberties except by lawful judgment of their peers, which means equals, or by the law of the land, or and. This continues to have relevance in Canada and many other countries today in current events. Quote, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and the right to not be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Quote, from the Canadian Constitution, Legal Rights, Section 7. Magna Carta, significance, number 4. The Magna Carta required the monarch to consult a great council made of lords and clergy. This is significant and very important because it set the motion for the early seeds of development of power sharing between different levels different branches of government and limited the power from being vested in one individual person. So it's also connected to the beginning of a concept of constitutional monarchy. Today, neither the Canadian Prime Minister nor the President of the United States has all the power, reflected by the concept of the Magna Carta, where the king no longer had all the power but had to share it with a council. This is also significant because it set the early stage for the foundation for the increase of democracy. Again, early stages of the inspiration for democracy and democratic institutions as power moved away from the monarch slowly, very, very slowly, and towards the people and elected representatives. But first it went to the Council of Lords in the time of the Magna Carta. Okay, other sources, 10 reasons from another site. 10 reasons why the Magna Carta is important. We'll take a quick look at that. Reason number 1, it established that no one, not even the king, is above the law. Number 2, it established that no one can be arrested or exiled without reason. Number 3, it established that everyone has a right to trial by jury. Number 4, it hinted at early women's rights. Clause 8 of the Magna Carta reads, no widow shall be compelled to marry so long as she prefers to live without a husband. The clause continues to say that if she does not want to remarry, she's not allowed to marry whomever she wants. Having the king or a baron step in was supposed to protect a woman from coercion. By allowing a woman to stay single after her husband died, the Magna Carta also protected her right to financial protection. It brushed up against freedom of religion. When the Magna Carta was signed, the rights of the Church of England were a top priority. There was a lot of tension between the king and the pope. The first clause of the Magna Carta establishes the freedom of the church for all time. So this is the beginning stages of freedom for people to have their own beliefs and their own religion of their choice. But it's, again, beginning steps. It's a prime example of how documents and their meanings evolve. When the king, John's barons, wrote the Magna Carta, they had no idea how the documents would be read in the future. There are 63 clauses. And it's changed over and over again over time. It's a symbol of holding power accountable. And now in modern Canadian law, the government can be taken to court. Number 8, it tells the story of people taking action. Number 9, it planted the seed of democracy. And number 10, it paved the way for human rights. Part 6, medieval law and power, justice for all. Well, not quite yet. So, justice was not quite equal for all. If you were a member of the clergy, you would have access to a different type of justice. If you were a serf, you would maybe not like the kind of justice you would get. Okay, medieval law and power. What were the sources of medieval law and power? Under the feudal system, the king had the power over the judicial system, as well as the control over the land, all the land. The king had jurisdiction over his nobles, most of the time, and lords, and they held power over vassals underneath them. The lord of the manor was in charge of law among those living on his lands. Now, they say the king had jurisdiction over his nobles most of the time, because occasionally there would be times where the nobles would try to exert their power over the king, like in the story of the nobles and the barons forcing King John to sign the Magna Carta. Now, this is a quote here from Pathways, from the textbook called Pathways by the author Michael Cranny. And that's the page number on 160. That's where the page is in this quote. You can see the brackets here, the last name of the author, comma, the first name of the author, and then the page number 160 is the page number where you'd find this quote. Okay, a trial by ordeal. In a trial by ordeal, a person would be subjected to torture. This could include being immersed in water, being forced to swallow poison, or having to carry a red-hot piece of iron a certain distance. If the person died from the ordeal, or if the injury resulting from the ordeal became infected, the judge would rule the person guilty. So, in particular, let's say, for example, of the red-hot iron, if their hand became infected from holding the red-hot iron in a way that was judged to be infected, they would be guilty. Okay, here's a video that we're going to skip for the fast version. Medieval courts and crimes. All right, you can find more information about this online or in your textbook. But there were different kinds of courts. Manor court, mostly for small things. Royal court, mostly for big things. And in some cases, the punishments could be excruciating, especially for people who tried to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I. Google the punishments for the attempted assassination of Queen Elizabeth I. But, warning, not G-rated. In church court, crimes committed by church officials or crimes committed by other people like witchcraft, blasphemy, and heresy. Now, this is simplified. It's a bit more complex, where if somebody was convicted of witchcraft or blasphemy by a court, or at certain times period, they could be handed over to a royal court. So there's some back and forth, but this is a simplification, and it depends on the time period, how things are handled. Okay, so for example, excommunication or interdict could be the consequence, but you could hear of also things like burning at the stake for witches, and so that's also interconnected to the execution usually being done by the government. Fines, time in stocks, removal of an ear or finger, or expulsion from the manor would be possible sentences for a manor court. Enrichment, extra, medieval punishments. If you are very fascinated by this topic, warning, this may not be G-rated, this may not be pretty. You can Google more about this topic of medieval punishments. There's a link here. We're not going to click on this link for the fast version about some more details about 5 crimes and the punishments that went with them. If you're interested, I will make this PowerPoint available to you to click on that link, or you can Google it. Enrichment extra, a fun one to learn about and Google about is Google trial by cake for a little extra interest and information about what that was all about. It sounds like if I had a choice, I would want to choose trial by cake versus trial by ducking or trial by hot iron. And part 7, extra enrichment, and some extra outtakes and extra information. Extra information. The helmets of Vikings. What did they actually look like? Well, over on this side of the page, you can see the Viking helmet is more accurately shown as this one or this one down here. Over here, we have examples from fiction and fantasy. Now, perhaps the horns may have been added by people spreading propaganda, or perhaps there were ceremonial helmets, but it is very unlikely that actual Vikings or most other types of tribes of people would have used a heavy weighted helmet into battle that looked like this. Now, there might be some corner cases for certain ancient helmets having some decoration, but this is too much weight in the wrong spot, especially this version here. Okay, moving on. What does this painting say about the bias towards First Nations from the civilization, the British civilization that created this painting? Well, here in this painting, General Wolfe, has the center of attention. His death is mimicking many great religious paintings about the death of Christ, with people gathered around. This person here holding the flag would actually mimic somebody holding the crucifix in the death of Christ. And in this time period, the height of people's heads indicated their importance and respect. And so with the First Nations person being lower down on the canvas, it sort of indicated them being considered not as important by the culture of this painting, perhaps, maybe. Okay. For extra enrichment, take a look at the story of Hiawatha in the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Note, also known as the Iroquois Confederacy. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy means people of the Longhouse, or people who lived in the Longhouse, is how it might be translated, and that's what they called themselves. Ironically, the explorers come along and called them the Iroquois Confederacy, and that's what sticks in many written accounts and written textbooks.
North.
Okay, another interesting thing to take a look at would be the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen from the French Revolution, and how that could be inspired by the Magna Carta, and how it adds to what was already thought of at the time. What is the significance of this declaration? Google the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? Also consider Googling the Declaration of the Rights of Woman. Okay. Suggested optional enrichment. Very optional. If you're interested in the topic, you could Google on YouTube or search on YouTube medieval weapons. Medieval weapon experts rate ... Ancient warfare experts rate 10 battle ... You don't need to fill in to get the search results. However, they're going to look at movies from pop culture and explain what they think is historically accurate and what they think is historically inaccurate. A very fascinating story. Now, I was going to recommend Googling a battle between a Viking and a samurai, but I no longer recommend or suggest that because it's so controversial now on the internet and so debated back and forth. But there is an interesting YouTube video on looking at the weapon of a Japanese katana versus a European longsword, where they actually take the two weapons and use the weapons against various objects to see how those weapons handle against ice, metal armor, and leather armor. And that seems to be a very interesting YouTube video because of the more scientific experiment methodology used, where they're using the weapons, a katana and a European longsword, and in their experiments, they're showing the results of their experiment in a way where the results are maybe perhaps have a better methodology than some of the other ones, where the methodology of the samurai versus of the Viking, the methodology is very questionable in all the videos and very hypothetical. And so it's just very, very, very debatable. The end. Have a good night. If you're still watching, remember, you can get a hold of me on Microsoft Teams and by email. Yo, 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 now it's time for the outtakes. Ba-doom, ba-doom, ba-doom. Mr. T-Dog in the house, and it's outtake time. Now I'm going to give you a lesson on how to put on a mask. You put this part over here and this part over here, and you put your mask on like that. Ah, easy peasy, sunshine breezy. Okay, there we go. That's how you put your mask on. Now it's time for Mr. T-Dog to have some coffee. Oh, this coffee's gone stale. That's no good. What is that, 5-day-old coffee? That is not good coffee. That is not good coffee. Have a good night. Now, if you have any questions, don't forget, give Mr. Vic an email at Vic_A.